there's something I've been holding inside for years, a truth that's still painful to share even now at 62. For 3 long years, I lived in what felt like an invisible cage, a marriage that appeared perfect and romantic to everyone else, but was slowly suffocating me from the inside. My second husband was a respected retired school principal, charming, well-spoken, the kind of man neighbors admired. From the outside, we looked like a beautiful story of second chances in our golden years. But behind the doors of our elegant home, he controlled every aspect of my life, every decision, every emotion, until one terrifying day when I collapsed right on the kitchen floor from sheer exhaustion and fear. He rushed me to the hospital, calmly explaining to the nurses that I'd simply tripped over our little cat. That's when his carefully built wall of deception began to show cracks, all because a compassionate doctor pulled the curtain, waited for him to step out, and asked me one quiet, life-changing question in private. Let me introduce myself properly. My name is Margaret, but friends and family have always called me Maggie. I was 58 when I first crossed paths with Richard at a bereavement support group in Portland, Maine. My first husband, David, the love of my life for almost 40 wonderful years, had passed away from cancer just 2 years earlier. Our 3 children were all grown, building their own families, and suddenly my once lively home felt echoing and empty. Nights were the hardest. I'd roll over in bed, instinctively reaching for the warmth of someone who was forever gone. The grief was overwhelming, a heavy fog that seemed endless. Then Richard appeared, like a gentle light in that darkness. He was 64, widowed for 4 years, with distinguished silver hair and those soft, understanding brown eyes that seemed to see right into your soul. For 3 decades, he'd been the principal of a local high school, respected, steady, the kind of man who commanded quiet authority. He spoke with such patience, truly listened when you shared your pain, and when he opened up about his late wife, Ellen, the raw sorrow in his voice felt so familiar, so comforting. It was as if we'd both been carrying the same invisible weight. After the group sessions, we started lingering for coffee. He'd share sweet stories about his daughter living in Seattle with her husband and his adorable grandchildren, pictures on his phone, funny anecdotes that made me smile for the first time in months. I'd open up about my own kids scattered across New England, their careers, their little ones. Richard never pushed, never rushed anything. He just provided this calm, reassuring presence that made the sharp edges of grief feel a little softer, a little more bearable. About 6 months in, he invited me out for a proper dinner, not just casual coffee, but a real date. I hesitated at first, flooded with guilt, feeling like I was somehow betraying David's memory. But my eldest daughter, Sarah, had been gently encouraging me. "Mom, Dad would want you to be happy again. It's okay to let someone in," so I said yes. The romance that followed felt like something out of an old-fashioned love story. Every weekend, without fail, Richard arrived with fresh flowers, roses, lilies, whatever was in season. He opened car doors, pulled out chairs, planned thoughtful evenings. Quiet walks along the waterfront, visits to small art galleries, dinners at intimate restaurants where we could talk for hours without interruption. He'd look at me across the table and say I was beautiful, that my smile lit up the room, even on days when I felt like a tired, grieving widow who'd forgotten who she was without her partner. After a full year of this gentle courtship, he proposed. It felt safe, secure, like the right next chapter. My children had met him several times by then. They liked his respectful manner, how he honored David's place in our family without trying to erase it. We kept the wedding simple, a quick ceremony at City Hall, followed by a warm family dinner. I sold the house I'd shared with David and moved into Richard's lovely home in a serene neighborhood, streets shaded by tall trees turning colors in fall. It was the house he'd built memories in with Ellen, but he promised we'd make it our own, redecorate together, blend our lives. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to the small signs. How he gently steered us toward keeping most of his furniture, his preferred colors on the walls, his established daily routines. I brushed it off as him being comfortably set in his ways after so many years alone. I wanted to be the understanding partner, not disruptive. Those first few months truly were nice. We'd cook side by side in the evenings, try new recipes or old favorites. We'd curl up with classic movies, take leisurely walks hand in hand around the block, waving at neighbors. His daughter called faithfully every Sunday. Hearing him laugh with his grandkids over speakerphone warmed the house. When my own children came to visit, Richard was gracious, helping with coats, serving coffee, asking thoughtful questions. Everything seemed harmonious. But then, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. The changes were so tiny at first that I dismissed them, convinced myself I was overthinking. One casual evening, I mentioned excitedly that I'd seen an ad for a pottery class at the community center, something I'd always dreamed of trying now that I finally had free time in retirement. Richard looked up from his book with a mild smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Pottery classes? Don't you think that's a touch indulgent at our age, Maggie? We really should be mindful of expenses. The class was affordable, and our combined pensions and savings left us more than comfortable, but he pressed on. At this stage, practical priorities make more sense. Besides, I thought you loved our cozy evenings together at home. I did love those evenings, but I also craved something just for me, a creative outlet, a chance to grow. Still, I didn't argue. I told myself he was being reasonable, that building a shared life meant compromise. A short time later, Sarah called full of excitement, inviting us to watch her young son play in a weekend baseball game. I brought it up over dinner. Richard's brow furrowed. But Saturdays are reserved for our grocery runs and weekly meal planning. Consistency keeps everything running smoothly, you know that. I suggested shifting it to Friday or Sunday. His jaw tightened just a fraction. Structure was key for Ellen and me all those years. It worked beautifully. There it was, the first subtle comparison to his late wife. I'd heard fleeting mentions before, how Ellen always had fresh coffee brewing precisely at dawn, how she embraced staying close to home, how she valued predictable routines above all. I attended the game alone. Richard pleaded a sudden headache. When I returned bubbling with pride, my grandson had smashed a home run. I couldn't wait to share. But Richard simply increased the television volume and stared at the screen, offering no greeting, no interest. That chilling withdrawal became his most powerful tool. Whenever I stepped outside his unspoken boundaries, he'd remain courteous on the surface but emotionally absent. Short answers, avoided eye contact, a coldness that lingered for days. Eventually, I'd find myself apologizing, though I was never entirely sure for what. To escape the tension, I started declining family invitations altogether. Comments about my wardrobe crept in next. Getting ready for church one Sunday, he'd glance over and ask, "Is that really what you're wearing today?" I'd look down at a perfectly nice dress I'd owned for years. Ellen always took such care with her Sunday best, nothing too relaxed. I'd march upstairs, try on outfit after outfit until he gave a reluctant nod, often approving something somber I'd worn to David's funeral. Cooking turned into a daily ordeal. David and I had shared kitchen duties casually. I was never a gourmet, but my meals were hearty and loving. With Richard, every bite came under scrutiny. He'd fork into dinner, pause, and sigh. "It's adequate, I suppose, just not quite like Ellen's special method." Or, "A tad overdone, but no matter." I'd scour cookbooks, watch endless online tutorials, spend hours perfecting dishes only to receive silence or faint criticism. Friendships faded too. When an old acquaintance from the support group reached out for lunch, Richard cautioned that dwelling with negative influences wasn't healthy anymore. We'd moved past grief, so we should move past those connections. His words carried an edge. At our age, positive surroundings matter most. I canceled the plans, and when she called again, I let it ring. Soon, the calls stopped. Sarah sensed the change first. My phone conversations grew brief and guarded, always aware Richard might overhear. When she proposed a girls' shopping day, just us, I invented prior commitments. "Mom," she said softly during one call, "you sound smaller somehow. Are you truly happy?" I laughed it away, but her observation haunted me like a shadow. One quiet afternoon, while organizing a spare room, I unearthed a forgotten box of old family photos. David and me with the kids on sunny vacations, laughing on beaches, celebrating birthdays. Holding one snapshot from Cape Cod, tears welled up unbidden. Not dramatic sobbing, just a deep ache for the joyful woman I'd once been. Richard walked in, caught me mid-tear, and his face darkened. "Still pining over him after all this time?" His tone was icy. I explained it was unexpected, triggered by the pictures. I boxed away Ellen's photos soon after she passed. Clinging to the past isn't healthy. He pointed out that David appeared in every frame with our children. How do you think that makes me feel, coming home to my wife weeping over another man? He wasn't just any man, he was my partner of 35 years, the father of my children. But Richard's anger flared. I'm your husband now, or have you forgotten? The harshness stunned me. This wasn't the tender man from our early days. I apologized profusely, hid the photos in the garage, and never touched them again. His moods sharpened further. I learned to read the warning signs. Lips pressed thin in disapproval, sudden unnatural stillness. A particular heavy silence signaling I'd crossed some invisible line. Phone calls to my kids happened only when he was out, always rushed, ears strained for his car in the drive. Visits grew rare. I'd fabricate illnesses or busyness to postpone. Sarah occasionally showed up unexpectedly. Richard switched on full charm for her, attentive, warm, but afterward the atmosphere crackled with unspoken rage directed at me. Even minor mishaps terrified me. Dropping an egg or slightly scorching toast could prompt lectures on how Ellen ran a flawless household, how I turned simple tasks into chaos. One explosive morning after a spilled drink, I finally retorted in frustration. Maybe you never got over Ellen either. Silence hung thick. Then Richard seized his plate and slammed it against the wall, ceramic exploding, food splattering everywhere. I'd never seen him violent before. Trembling, I cleaned the wreckage while he calmly instructed me to finish and left the room. That incident crystallized everything. This wasn't about imperfect meals or casual clothes. It was deliberate control, eroding my identity piece by piece until I fit neatly into the narrow role he demanded. Yet I stayed, ashamed to admit another failed marriage, terrified of solitude in my 60s, desperately holding onto flickers of the kind man I'd fallen for, convincing myself that if I tried harder, he'd return permanently. Worse was coming. One Thursday after I'd slaved over a perfect recreation of Ellen's signature roast, good china set, favorite blouse on, he arrived hours late without a word. The food was ruined. When I gently asked why he hadn't phoned, his eyes flashed dangerously. He accused me of nagging, of never being satisfied, of ambushing him after a long day. Nothing like Ellen, who knew a man needed peace at home. He demanded absolute silence from me for the evening. For days he slept in the guest room, treating me like furniture. Meals prepared and ignored, dishes left for me. The cycle solidified. Perceived slights, prolonged icy withdrawal, my frantic apologies and promises to improve, brief honeymoons of affection that left me pathetically grateful. I became a shadow, rarely leaving except for essentials, appetite gone from constant anxiety, clothes hanging loose on a frame I'd barely recognize in the mirror. The night that shattered everything arrived in late autumn. Another carefully prepared dinner dismissed as undercooked. When I quietly defended my effort, Richard erupted. Daily disappointment, ungrateful, needy, useless. Words rained like blows. As I backed away, fear rising, he grabbed a heavy bowl and hurled it at the wall beside my head, shards flying, marinade dripping. Standing over my cowering form, he said coldly, "See what you make me do when you push too far?" He left. I cleaned alone for hours, body shaking, finally accepting this would escalate. Escape felt impossible. Who'd believe such insidious cruelty from a pillar of the community man? I'd isolated myself from potential allies. He returned with flowers and apologies days later, acting as if nothing happened. But the damage was irreversible. Panic attacks began, racing pulse, dizziness, midnight terror. One morning mid-breakfast prep, the world spun violently. I collapsed. Richard called emergency services, performing devoted husband flawlessly. Tests revealed critical high blood pressure, severe dehydration, malnutrition. The doctor spotted fading bruises from prior rough grips. Once alone, she leaned in gently. "Maggie, do you feel safe at home?" That single question unleashed everything. Sobs racked me as years of torment spilled out. She validated it all, classic emotional and psychological abuse, often precursor to physical. She arranged overnight stay and a specialist consult. Advocate Karen explained isolation strategies, safety planning, hotlines, legal options. Your children will want to help once they know. Alone that night, I dreamed of freedom, visiting grandkids spontaneously, pursuing hobbies, speaking without fear. Over cautious weeks, I rebuilt bridges. From a public phone, I confessed everything to Sarah. She and my son arrived swiftly while Richard was away, packed essentials. I left a concise note, "I'm gone." Contact through lawyers. Divorce was grueling, his alternating pleas, gaslighting, claims of my instability, but records and testimony prevailed. I recovered my prior home's value, assets divided equitably. Today, a year free at 62, I thrive in a bright condo near Sarah. Grandkids fill weekends with joy. Pottery class has become my passion. My pieces line shelves proudly. Old friends welcomed me back without judgment. Weekly therapy and a survivor group mend lingering wounds. I know now, none of it was my fault. Leaving required immense bravery. If this echoes your life, please believe me, you're not imagining it, not too sensitive, not deserving of diminishment. Emotional abuse scars deeply, invisibly. You deserve safety, respect, love without strings or fear. Reach out today, National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-7233. Trusted friend, doctor, counselor, break the silence. Document patterns. Plan safely. Abusers rarely reform permanently, cycles worsen. But beyond waits freedom, breathing deeply, choosing freely, reclaiming yourself. You are resilient, valuable, worthy. There is vibrant life after. Take that courageous step, you're worth every bit of happiness waiting. Music.